"Grandpa, Mommy cries a lot. She hurt Mommy many times." My 3-year-old grandson whispered those words into my ear while I stood in the hallway of my own estate, 40 minutes before I was set to marry the woman waiting at the end of that hallway in an ivory dress. 400 guests were already seated. The string quartet was tuning beneath the oak tree, and I was about to learn that everyone I trusted had been lying to me for 2 years. My name is George Harland. I built Harland Estate with my bare hands and $23, and I buried my wife Margaret 3 years before that morning. Grief does strange things to a man of 65. It makes you hungry for warmth in a way that clouds your judgment. That hunger is exactly what Diane Mercer found when she walked into my life 5 months after Margaret died. She was elegant, sharp, and warm in all the right ways. Warm enough that I never noticed the moment her expression changed the second my back was turned. I didn't see it, but someone did. That morning in the hallway, my grandson Cody tugged my hand and told me his mother cried every night when she thought no one could hear. Then he pulled out his mother's tablet and told me, by accident, he'd recorded something about me. I took the tablet. I didn't look at it yet. I handed it to Sarah, my housekeeper of 20 years, who appeared behind me without a word, the way she always did when something needed handling quietly. I told her to get my brother Bobby, my head of security Marcus, and my oldest friend Dr. Peter Walsh. Meet me in the security office. Come quietly. Then I turned, straightened my jacket, and walked toward my own wedding with a decision already forming in my chest. To understand what happened in that chapel, you need to understand what came before it, and how thoroughly I'd been blind to my own family unraveling around me. I met Diane at a charity dinner my brother Bobby dragged me to 5 months after Margaret's funeral. She was 50, composed, and she listened to me the way Margaret used to. Really listened. I told myself that was simply a quality good people share. I didn't consider that it might be a skill. What I didn't see, what Sarah saw from the very beginning, was what happened the instant I left a room. The warmth would drain out of Diane's face like water from a glass, not fade, vanish. And in its place came careful, pointed questions to my daughter Emily about estate accounts, insurance beneficiaries, succession plans, delivered so casually over coffee that no one felt interrogated. Diane wasn't falling in love with what I'd built. She was mapping it. Within a year, she'd moved into Harland Estate socially, then practically. She replaced the photograph of Margaret and me at the top of the staircase with abstract art, framing it as a kindness. She'd have it properly restored for Emily. She swapped Margaret's coffee, her ceramics, her needlepoint, 17 small pieces of my late wife's life, quietly boxed, and disappeared over 3 months while I noticed nothing. Then came the joint checking account, presented as simplifying our finances. Over 18 months, she pulled almost $240,000 out of it, in careful increments too small to trigger a bank alert, funneling it to a cousin in Baton Rouge who had no discernible reason to need it. Meanwhile, my daughter Emily, sharp, successful, a director at her firm by 28, had married a man named Trevor Holloway in 2021. Margaret, before she passed, took one dinner to size him up. That young man has never built anything with his own hands. She was right, as she always was. I didn't water that seed fast enough. Trevor didn't attack Emily's independence. He dismantled it, one reasonable-sounding suggestion at a time. Her job was making her anxious, he said. Cody needed stability. Friends became inconvenient, then exhausting to see, then simply absent. When Emily broke down twice during an exhausting week in late 2023, Trevor filmed her, not to help her, but to tell her friends she was struggling and shouldn't be contacted. He called it protection. It was architecture. He was building walls around my daughter and letting her believe she'd built them herself. She tried to reach me 3 times. A letter mailed by hand that never arrived. A borrowed phone call Diane overheard and reported to Trevor before the night was out. After that, she stopped trying, not because she'd given up, but because she'd calculated, correctly, that she had no proof and no one who'd believe her, over her own husband and my fiancé. Sarah began building the case I didn't know I needed. In March of 2024, cleaning out an old storage room, She found a folded 2014 newspaper from Atlanta. The headline: a prominent developer named Harold Mercer had died suddenly at 71, 14 months into his second marriage, to a woman considerably younger, named Diane. An inquiry had opened and closed without charges. The widow had cooperated, then relocated. Sarah sat with that paper for a long time before she called my brother Bobby. They didn't come to me yet. They didn't have enough. So they kept watching, kept writing everything down in a small navy notebook Sarah had been filling since the previous August. Every date, every overheard conversation, every flicker of Diane's true face the moment I turned away. Marcus, meanwhile, was watching Trevor. Security logs showed a silver sedan appearing at my gate 11 times over 6 months. Always when I was away, always met personally by Trevor, rather than escorted properly by staff. A violation of protocol that told Marcus everything he needed to know before he needed to know it. Then came a call from my business partner of 11 years, Raymond Sutherland, embarrassed and careful, asking about the $40,000 he'd lent Trevor on the understanding that I was aware and supportive. I wasn't. 7 of my partners had been approached the same way. Trevor never forged my signature. He didn't need to. He simply borrowed my reputation and let people's trust in me do the rest, which is fraud by any honest definition, even when nothing is written down. In August, Marcus caught Trevor on camera, letting a man with a briefcase into my private document room at midnight, using a key I'd given him years earlier, in a moment of ordinary generosity. The man left with a manila envelope that hadn't been in his hands going in. He turned out to be a contracted attorney for a company called Holloway Consulting, incorporated 8 months prior, with Trevor as principal. My articles of incorporation had been moved. Nothing was missing yet. But someone was preparing something for me to sign, and they were choosing their moment. That moment, it became clear, was going to be my wedding. In September, my oldest friend, Dr. Peter Walsh, called me on a Sunday evening, his voice careful in a way I recognized from 30 years of friendship. During Emily's physical, he'd found recent bruising on her wrist. She'd claimed a cabinet door. He didn't believe her, and legally, he couldn't tell me anything without her consent, until she gave it, 2 weeks later, asking him to be ready to speak on the record if it became necessary. She was protecting you even then. Peter told me. You already know what to do. You've known since Cody told you. He was right, I did. 3 weeks before the wedding, Emily finally told me herself, in the library, everything Trevor had done, the isolation, the filmed breakdowns, the letter that never arrived. And weeks after that, in the kitchen, she told me the part that still sits hardest in my chest. In January, she'd walked into Trevor's office, looking for Cody's insurance papers, and found Trevor and Diane standing close together, speaking in a way that had nothing to do with household arrangements. Diane had turned to her, calm and level, and asked whether Emily really wanted to be the one who destroyed everything her grieving father had finally rebuilt. Emily had nodded, walked out, said nothing, not because she was weak, but because 2 calculating people had made her afraid of the one person who could have helped her. By the night before the wedding, I had it all: Sarah's notebook, Marcus's photographs and call logs, Peter's medical observations, Raymond's testimony, and a folded newspaper from Atlanta. I gathered them all in the security office at 11 at night, and we went through it, piece by piece, for 2 hours. Alone, each fact had been troubling. Together, they were a portrait of 2 people who had spent 2 years inside my family, working toward a single objective, and who were one morning away from getting it. I want to explain what I felt sitting in my study afterward, because it wasn't rage, not yet. It was grief for how much I'd allowed, however unknowingly. I'd opened the account. I'd given Trevor the key. I'd told him I'd keep it in mind when he suggested, so reasonably, that Emily wasn't stable enough to be trusted with responsibility. I sat with Margaret's photograph on my desk and asked her, in the only way I still could, whether I was doing the right thing. I already knew the answer. I wrote 3 private promises to myself that night. Tell Emily the truth myself, protect Cody from ever knowing the weight of what had almost happened around him, and put Margaret's photograph back on that staircase before the week was out. Which brings us back to that hallway, to Cody's small hand on mine. to the tablet that confirmed everything I already knew. I walked into my own wedding 40 minutes later, exactly on schedule, greeting 400 guests with the calm of a man who had made his peace with what the morning required. Bobby was there. Sarah, notebook in her coat. Marcus, at his post since 6. Raymond and 2 other partners Trevor had borrowed against, seated quietly among the guests, present to bear witness. At 9:40, Cody found me again near the chapel steps with the same tablet, the same solemn trust, and I crouched down and thanked him, and told him he'd done exactly the right thing. Across the garden, Emily watched me take it. I gave her the smallest nod. Something in her finally let go. I asked the officiant to step aside. The chapel filled, 400 faces expecting to watch a wedding. I gave Marcus the signal. The screen behind the altar lit up. 43 seconds of Trevor's own voice, recorded from that tablet, explaining in the flat tone of a business transaction exactly how he intended to get me to sign away control of my company at my own reception. Diane's voice followed, calmly discussing how manageable Emily would be now that she was so thoroughly isolated. The chapel went silent enough to hear the wind against the stained glass. Sarah walked to the front and read from her notebook for 4 minutes. Dates, withdrawals, the 17 missing objects, Diane's own words caught in unguarded moments. Peter stood and, with Emily's consent on record, described what a frightened patient looks like and what pattern of evidence produces it. Then the side door opened, and Emily walked in wearing a plain gray sweater, her chin level, and took my outstretched hand in front of everyone. Trevor bolted for the exit and found Raymond and 2 attorneys blocking the aisle, papers in hand. Diane simply stood there in her ivory dress as the last of her constructed warmth fell away, and there was nothing recognizable left underneath it, just the flat absence of someone who had built herself entirely out of strategy. They left through the side door at 11:47 that morning. I didn't arrange that detail, but it felt right. The front door had always been for people who belonged. The food meant for 400 went to 3 shelters in Nashville. The roses stayed. They'd done nothing wrong. That evening, I found Margaret's photograph still boxed in the storage room, wrapped in a dish towel, and hung it back at the top of the stairs where it had lived for 38 years. I promoted Sarah to head of household operations, effective immediately, 20 years overdue. In the garden that afternoon, Emily told me she'd been holding her breath for 2 years and had just remembered how to breathe. Cody ran up with a feather he'd found, entirely unaware that he'd just saved his family, wanting only to know if he could keep it. That night, I wrote 3 words in my desk notebook. I was loved. Not by Diane, not for a single day, but by a wife who never once said I told you so, by a daughter who protected her son at the cost of her own silence, and by a 3-year-old boy who trusted an old man with a truth too heavy for him to carry alone. I nearly lost everything, not to a stranger, but to people I fed at my own table. But I got another chance because a child with his grandmother's eyes told me the truth everyone else was too afraid to say. That's the only kind of love worth building a house around, the kind that costs something and tells the truth even when it's hard.